Here's us. There you go. Welcome to First Baptist this morning. Exciting time. No refreshments today. Need somebody to step up to the plate and sign up on that refreshment sheet back there. So we'll talk about some stuff. Actually, if anybody wants to, we need a person probably to handle. I would love to see a person handle the coffee every Sunday, so we know we're going to have coffee regardless of what else happens and gets there in the morning. So if you're a coffee maker or can be here in the morning to make coffee, just look on that little purple sheet and you check off, the socials or fellowship. And if you can't find a place, just right in there, coffee. Real good. We're a church of variety, aren't we? Man, we start out with what a friend we have in Jesus, and with let it rise. That's okay, right? Good. Great variety. It's that's what I love about our church. We really are. We've a variety. Even we're going to ethnics, ages. In fact, there's a church in Oregon when we went out to seminary that we purposely didn't go to because it was all people our age, and we thought, man, where's the wisdom in the church? We wanted a church that had a variety of ages so we could experience the whole gamut. And wound up with a church maybe a little bit smaller than ours right now for the 4 years we're out there. Great ministry and everything else. Today we're going to be on a sermon that's not in part of a series. We're going to continue on this leadership theme this morning, and then tomorrow next week we're going to start back into 2 Peter. So you have a week to find out where 2 Peter is in the Bible. We've been doing 1 Peter for a long while, so if you find that, you'll be able to hit 2 Peter, and we'll start back there with our series. And next week, by the way, is National Back to Church Sunday, if you don't know that. National Back to, all over the nation, trying to get people back to church. It's the Sunday that they do that. So if you want to use that as you're talking to people, hey, next week's National Back to Church Sunday. Why don't you come to church with me, Invite them out if they don't go someplace. But today we're going to look at that and at the area of leadership a little bit. And we're going to start with a quiz, okay? What is one of the most popular TV shows on TV that has to do with the Navy? And I'm not talking McHale's Navy or Gomer Pyle. I'm talking more recent. NCIS. Okay, NCIS. There you go. I knew I'd get that reaction. On Tuesday nights, I got to be home at 8 o'clock so we can watch NCIS. New episodes begin on, when's it start? September 23. So, man, you know where I'm going to be next week, I'll tell you. And my staff meeting for the Army is on Tuesday nights via phone, at 7 o'clock. And I'll tell you, sometimes they go over, and at 8 o'clock, he's down there. Daddy, I'm on the phone with the general, just give me, I'll be up there as soon as I can. Daddy, 8 o'clock, NCIS. So, at any rate. And what's the name of the main character? What's the real name of the main character in that? Huh? Mark Harmon, right, Mark Harmon. And actually, we were watching, my son's gotten into watching Walker, Texas Ranger in the mornings before he goes to work. And his cohort on that film is Alex, if you remember, the female district attorney. And so I thought, well, let me find out a little bit more. I looked her up this last week while he was watching it at one point and found out that she dated Mark Harmon at one point in her career. Oh, that was kind of interesting. What's Mark Harmon's stage name on there? Gibbs, okay. What's his full name? Yes, thank you. They said Jethro Gibbs in the first, so I said, no, it's Leroy Jethro Gibbs. But he goes by his middle name, and everybody calls him. They don't call, you never heard him called Leroy, right? He's always called Jethro by his friends. Okay, everyone's with me so far. First service, total silence at this point. On the next question. What Bible character is Leroy Jethro Gibbs' middle name named after? And if you're in the first service, don't say anything. But so far, I'm not hearing isn't it deafening? Jethro. Well, you're on the right track. Abraham's father. Who was Jethro? Come on. Huh? Moses' father-in-law. Our Karen students come through. Yay, Karen! Very good. Thank you. You need to be in our first service. Well, somebody finally, Pat Wright, our financial secretary, and our guest that's morning, I forget who it was with her right now, but they got it right. Jethro was Moses' father-in-law. Okay, so we're going to talk about Jethro this morning, look at some of the leadership things he talked about, and to give you basically a little bit of an update on a background on that. You remember Moses was in Egypt, and he fled Egypt for what reason? Why did he flee Egypt? Murdered somebody. Okay, so he murdered somebody. Flees to Midian. He gets there, and he gets to meet Jethro. How did he get to meet Jethro? What happened that caused him to meet Jethro? Anybody know? Daughter what? Yes, after what? Anybody know what caused the daughter to bring him back home? Yes, the sheep. Okay, we're at the well, and the daughters are trying to get their sheep, watered up and so forth, and they always come back late. Moses goes, and he sees these shepherds that are not letting them through it. He runs off the shepherds and helps the girls feed get their flocks their water. They show up back home early that day, and Jethro says, "How come you came early?" They said, "Well, some Egyptian guy just ran off all the shepherds and let us water our flocks." He says, "Well, where is he?" He says, "I don't know. We left him there." Says, "Why'd you invite him home for dinner?" So I guess they go back and get him. They bring him home for dinner, and he hangs around and winds up. You have marriages now where the father gives away the daughter. Well, that happened back then, and he wound up marrying. Jethro wound up giving Moses one of his daughters as a wife, and they lived there for a number of years until Moses found something in the desert which struck his fancy, which was very unusual, and that was a what? Burning bush, okay? So he says, "I need to go back, if this encounter with God, go back and free my people Israel." And so he goes to his father-in-law, Jethro, and says, "Can I leave for a while? I need to go back to Pharaoh." And he gives him leave. But I think maybe the real reason he was asking because he didn't want to take his wife and kids along with him. He said, "You keep the wife and kids while I go back to Pharaoh." And so he leaves his wife and one or two children at that point with him. I guess two children at that point with Jethro. He goes back to Egypt. They get freed. He comes out on the Exodus. And as he's coming back out of the Exodus, he winds up hearing from his father-in-law, Jethro, and that's where we're going to pick it up this morning. So if you look in the book of Exodus, chapter 18, we're going to be there. If you don't have a Bible with you, please pick one up out of the pew. We always go through the scriptures, we'll read it through and so forth, and we always deal with them, and we don't have them up. Sometimes we put verses or whatever up on there, a few, but we basically don't do that. We go through the Bible, so find Exodus chapter 18. It's the second book in the Bible, so it's the very beginning, and we're going to go over a little bit of the history and what brings them to this point in what we look at today as far as leadership goes. What we wind up in verses 1 through 6 is Jethro contacting Moses and saying, "I got your wife and kids, we're coming." Okay, let's read it through, if you will, with me as we follow along. "Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Moses' wife Zipporah after he had sent her away, and her two sons, of whom one was named Gershom, and he said, 'I have been a sojourner in a foreign land.' And the other was named Eleazar, for he said, 'The God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh.'" By the way, the name for God in the Bible is Elohim, short L, okay, E-L, so that's why you see Eleazar starts with E-L because it means that God is my father. The God of my father was my help. Verse 5, "Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was camped at the Mount of God. And he sent word to Moses, 'I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons with her.' Then Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent." So the first thing we have coming up here is Jethro takes his wife and two sons to meet him, and they wind up being there and getting together. Now we're going to move into this section where it says what happened once they started communicating. Pick it up with me at verse 7, if you will. And this is this is basically a time when they talk together, eat together, and have some sacrifices. Let's to honor God. It says in verse 8, "And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had befallen them on the journey, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the hand of the Egyptians. So Jethro said, 'Blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians.' Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. Now, you have to remember that Jethro was a priest in Midian. Now, was he a priest to God? I'm assuming yes, okay? But probably not real knowledgeable. I mean, they didn't have the Bible to look at and study and so forth, so he only knew about God from what he talked to him and so forth. But like Melchizedek, who was a priest unto God, in Abraham's time, this guy was a priest, okay? But he learns a little bit as he goes along. And he says, what I understand is that our God, your God, is the God that's the head of all gods, and he handles everything according to what you said, and he conquered all of the Egyptian gods. A side note, the plagues, a lot of the plagues surrounded the various gods of the Egyptians. They worshipped a lot of the very things that the plagues were destined on, like the frogs, a sacred animal or whatever. They worshipped those things, and so God was over all those. Verse 12, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, which is why I believe he was worshiping the supreme God that Moses knew. And Aaron came, Moses' brother, with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. So they get together, they offer sacrifices, they worship God. That's one thing they do. And as Pepe was leading us this morning, of course, Thanksgiving should be a part of our prayers as we look to working for God and with God in our endeavors. This morning, I'd like to concentrate on verses 13 to the end of the chapter, and we'd like to talk about a little bit of leadership principles as we move into this kind of future and what we can learn from Moses himself. Let's read verses 13 and 14 to start off, and we find here God's first national leader. I want you to remember now, this is the first time they're together. They've never been a nation before. They've just been slaves. They're coming out, and now they no longer have slaves. It's kind of like they're no longer slaves. It's kind of like when we were our revolution. Okay, we answered to England. We threw off England, became our own nation. Well, what do we have to do? We had to develop a constitution, and the Bill of Rights came up in the very early days. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution. We had the first Continental Congress. All this stuff. It was a lot of fluidity there, and so that's what's happening here. So Moses, the first national leader, they've just thrown off their captors. Now what are we going to do? And so this is where we pick it up at this point with God's first national leader, who is Moses. Verses 13 and 14. And it came about the next day, after they had greeted and got to meet each other, that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood about Moses from morning until evening. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit to judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" And I've called this, if you're following your notes and you want to look at that, what color is the sheet? Blue, I think. It's blue sheet this morning. Your notes there. I call it long lines. Have you ever experienced a long line anyplace? Where have you experienced long lines at? Come on. Well, supermarket, okay? Well, I don't want to ditch Walmart, but I just hate, I can never find a checker open. What? Which one? Roller coaster. Yes, the amusement park. We went to Disney World with Jamie for the last time before she gets married, and man, an hour and 45 minutes this ride, is that worth it? Long line. Do we want to go there? Oh, where else you get long lines at? Military. Huh? Military. Yeah. Well, yes. Hurry up and wait. Where else? Airport. Oh, security at the airport. Yes. Where else? Huh? Nobody else? Huh? DMV. Oh, yeah, someone gave that in the morning. Yeah, DMV, trying to get stuff. That's absolutely. And nobody had them, first service had the bank. Anybody get a long line at the bank? Not anymore. No money, huh? It was funny. In the Philippines, we used to go there when we were there for 6 months. They treat bank service a little bit different than we have here. We would take our money and we put it inside our passbook. We had a savings account passbook. You walk up to the desk, and they've got like these low desks, and the ladies are sitting behind the desk, the tellers. Maybe 5 or 6 desks, whatever it is. And you walk up, you take your money and your passbook, and you stick it on top of the pile with everybody else's money and passbook. Kind of thing, and just put the top of the pile. And you walk over, and they got these nice cushioned seats there with tables and magazines and newspapers, and you sit down and read the newspaper. And they handle the bottom one, and when they eventually get to yours, they call your name, and you walk up and you do your banking, and then you leave. Very interesting, kind of thing. One of my places, I went the other day to this place, and the room was empty. I think it's the first time in years I've ever seen that I've gotten right to the clerk. Normally I'm saying, want to put new clerks, long lines. The post office. At least Morrisville, so busy, never gonna lie. Long lines. So long lines are frustrating. Well, you can imagine the problem with Moses' territory of a new nation, and he's the only guy to answer questions. The only guy that can judge when you have a problem. Now, the other thing that you could say you have long lines at is probably the court system, right? I don't know if you've ever been to court. I'm not going to ask who's been to court. There's probably a lot of reasons you could be to court. You could have gotten a ticket. Might have been that you're testifying for somebody. But oftentimes, you're the fourth one on the docket today. And you sit and you wait for your court to come. You're not going to rush anybody. You just wait for it to come. And that's what this was like. It was the court system, and he was the only one. Long lines. Very frustrating for the people. The second thing we find out in this section about Moses' leadership style in the beginning was verses 15 and 16, one human mediator. Let's read verses 15 and 16 here. And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. That's the reason. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known the statutes of God and his laws. Now, this was before the 10 Commandments. A lot of the laws were written. And so they couldn't go to some scroll and say this is how to handle it. He had to do it all. And so he winds up being the only human mediator that they have at this point. It's kind of like even the church, the Roman Catholic Church has at this point. They have a priest, right? And the priest is really a lot more highly revered than in a lot of other churches, such as ours. The priest he runs the place. Or if in a synagogue, the Jewish rabbi, he runs the place. A lot more so than even here. But even in our church, as it comes, a person gets sick, and who do they want to see? Pastor. Want the pastor to come, and. I expect a pastoral visit, and I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying that it's just, that's the way it is. The pastor's the only one that, that's the one they want to see a lot of times. And, a larger church, some of these really big churches, you'll never see the pastor unless you're on a, official position someplace. And then if you see the pastor in the hospital, he's probably there to pray with you right before you die, So, only want to see the pastor, and that's how they were here, It's got to be the pastor, and it's got to be Moses. He was the only one that could do it. He was the only one that was talking to them. He was the only mediator. Now, in 1 Timothy 2:5, it says there is one mediator between man and God, and that is whom? Jesus Christ. But, of course, Jesus Christ hadn't been gone to the cross and wasn't being the mediator at this point. They used human priests. And so that's what he found himself in, this particular dilemma. The third thing we find out here is that there's a susceptibility when you are the only one who can do it. What happens when leaders are the only one and they do it all? What are they susceptible to? Burnout. We all know that, don't we? We hear the word so much today. Leader burnout, and that's the third thing we find. Look at verses 17 and 18. And Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely, what? Wear out both yourself and who? You following along with me in the Bible? These people, right, and these people who are with you. For the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Some leaders have that thing we sometimes call the God syndrome, I'm the only one that can do it. I'm the best. I'm God's gift to the people. And depending, you look at some of the big TV people, the big TV evangelists and so forth or whatever, and there's a lot of great people on TV, a lot of good missions, and praise God for the ministry of TV. In fact, now, I don't know if I should tell them this. Should I tell them if they miss the service, they can see it on the internet, YouTube? I don't want you to skip services just so you can sit home and watch it, okay? But if you miss a week, our service is on YouTube. You can watch the service. So there's great ministries out there. But sometimes guys get so big and they get so much like I'm it that they wind up not only going to burnout, but they wind up doing things that are dumb and stupid and getting and going the wrong direction. When they say I can do everything. In the short term, sometimes that works. You have a project coming up, and you know that if you give it off to somebody else, it's just not going to get done, and you got to do it. You can do that occasionally, but you can't do it all the time. Even God rested on the seventh day. 1 out of 7. Now, I don't think God got tired, and that's why I had to rest. I think God has super, amounts of energy, infinite wisdom, infinite energy. He's not going to get tired, but he took a rest. Whether he needed it or not, he took a rest. And I think it was a good example for us. We need to take a rest, and sometimes leaders need to take a rest. We can't do it all. We can't run 24/7 and do everything. We got to learn to be able to do some of what we're going to learn here in this text. We got to learn to go for some help. We shouldn't get a Messiah context. Sometimes people put that on their leadership, and it's not right. When I first came, and some people may even know who this person was. I'm not going to mention their name. They're not here anymore. But, this person used to call when I first got here in the morning, around 9 o'clock in the morning at the church office to see if I made it in by 8 o'clock. So I was getting earning my keep. Did I make it in the office on time? Yeah. Told me about it later on. Interesting. They want to make sure that the pastor's doing his job. After all, that's what we hire you for. Some of my friends like to kid me, and I know that, and I know they're kidding because they really know. Well, one of my cousins comes by every once in a while. Well, you only work a half hour a week, right? God bless him. He's in a church. In fact, Lish is here. It's Bobby. Loves the kid around. But we know that that's not true. But yet, that's the way sometimes we work with our leaders. We want them to do everything for us, and we got to learn to realize that leaders will burn out if they do it all themselves. And sometimes leaders cause the problems themselves. Leadership is not easy. First principle you have to learn from this section. Leadership is not easy. It's worth it, but it's not easy. The second thing as we look at this is God brings into play here his first efficiency expert. When I was working for Tom Peterson's out west, we were sold TVs and microwaves and all kinds of electronics, and we wanted the furniture, and I was one of the delivery guys. My claim to fame was I once got on a shot of an advertisement taking a refrigerator off a TV, off of the van. But that was my claim to fame. But he brought in an efficiency expert, and the next thing I knew, my boss was fired. Well, we don't need that middle management. We can just get by without him. We'll just give it to somebody else. And efficiency is something that companies try to do all the time today, don't they? Right? We're downsizing, we're getting rid of this person, we don't need this, doing more things more efficiently. Well, this is God's first efficiency expert. It's Jethro. Let's look at verse 19 as we start the second section here. It says in verse 19, now listen to me. Let's just stop there. Listen. It's something that we have trouble doing. Just ask my wife. She'll tell you that I have problems listening sometimes. Okay? We all have problems listening sometimes, don't we? But Moses listened. And listening doesn't always mean just hearing, although sometimes that's all we need to evaluate, and sometimes something we hear may not be worth listening to. But sometimes it is, and we need to be able to follow it through. It says here, Jethro says, the father-in-law says, listen to me, I give you counsel, and the God be with you. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring disputes to God. That's true. So the first thing we learn from this is that it's a leader's responsibility to talk to God for the people, right? That's what Moses was doing. So he's acknowledging that. I call it pray. You pray for the people. So the first thing that a leader's got to do, prayer's got to be a part of it. Pepe led us in some prayer this morning that was very good. It was great. It was important. But a leader's prayer life needs to be accessible. It needs to have access to God. It needs to be right. And sometimes it's difficult. You may not be able to have a half hour of prayer every morning, and that may not be that's not the standard. Maybe it's 5 minutes here, maybe it's 5 minutes there, maybe it's while you're driving to work. But we do need to communicate with God, and all leaders need to do that. And that was the first thing he acknowledged. The second thing comes off in verse 20. It says, then teach them the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work they are to do. Good leaders, I put down preach, it could be teach, train, but we need to let the people know what they're supposed to do. In the Army, we have all these manuals, AR 165-1 is for the chaplains, and you got map every single thing. Now they're consolidating it all, and they want fewer manuals. It's going down to like 13. They're 25 pages each and so forth. Call them ADPs now, and they're trying to streamline. But you have to have something like that. PMCS, PMCS, Preventative Maintenance Checks and Services. Everything you do, whether it's a gun or whether it's a truck, whether it's an air conditioner, it's all got a manual. Okay, in what we do, there's manuals. Even for our church, we have what we call principles and guidelines. Okay, it's something to help learn. For the Christian, for how we do business. And for the Christian, what is our manual? God's word, okay? There it is. We've got to learn it. The laws and so forth, he told Moses, you teach them. Tell the people so they can do it themselves. It's not like the place where you got to go to the priest and ask the priest and he tells you what God says. We are all priests. And so we need to learn the Bible. And so he says the second quality of leadership is teach, preach, train, let them know how to do it. Train them, equip them. The third thing that comes up in verse 21 and 22 is, furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, or of hundreds, or of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that every major dispute they will bring to you, but every minor dispute they themselves will judge, so it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. It's always nice to have somebody with you in the ring, right? In the job, whatever you're doing. Doesn't all fall on you. And that's what he's saying. Develop the people, have people around you. And there's actually even, I have up here on the, if you want to look, you appoint leaders of all these. There's a kind of an illustration, a picture. You have the thousands, the tens, and so forth, and you go on down. And I'm not going to go into this because there's another point here at which I'm going to flesh this out a little bit for us. But it's a matter of delegation. Train other people how to do. What's the quote, give a person a fish they eat for a day, teach them to fish, and they'll eat for a lifetime. Train other people. You can't do it all yourself. If you're in leadership, I don't care if it's a secular job, if it's management, if it's a school, a student body, it doesn't matter what it is. Leadership can't do it all yourself. You've got to train others. And then the fourth thing we find in this, verse 23, was some projected results. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people also will go to their place in peace. So there's two things here. First of all, the leader endures. Okay, and endurance is mentioned 38 times in the Bible because the Christian life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You run a short term, yeah, you can make it for a while, but it's a long race. I'm getting ready. You might see me for the next month or so running around the community and walking and then running and getting ready for my PT test, that 2-mile, meet with reality in my life, and it'll come first Friday of October, so that might be a matter of prayer. But at any rate, you start off, a good pace, then you get a little bit after it. Maybe you're slowing down. You want to keep that steady pace before you see that end. Man, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to miss by 3 seconds. And you pour it on at the end. You don't run the whole race the exact same way. And sometimes you stumble. If you hit a stone and you you don't twist your ankle, but you fall and you get up and keep on going. And in the Christian life, that happens. It's not just everything's hunky-dory. As we endure, things will come up that will block our way, obstacles and so forth. But we've got to be willing to endure. And if we do this, Jethro says to Moses, you will endure, the leader. But not only the leader. Look at that. I think it's so interesting in verse 23. It says, and all these people also will go to their place in peace. They will come out of the lines waiting for you to adjudicate this stuff, and they'll go home in peace. They'll have a peaceful resolution to their problem. Because when leaders try to do it all themselves, things get backed up, things get missed, and the people have problems. There's dissension in the ranks at the grocery store or at the place where you work or someplace else because it's not being run efficiently. So we as leaders need to realize that when we get this right for ourselves, we also help our people because they can get it right. And so whether you're leading in Awana, whether you're leading in Sunday school, whether you're a manager at church, at work, whatever you happen to do, we need to learn these principles because they're important not only for us, but also for the people we serve. And the principle you learn here is you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. The third thing we find in verses 24 through 27 is this new strategy for oversight. And now we're going to find out how this works. In verses 24 through 26, Moses implements what Jethro suggested. So Moses listened to his father-in-law. Let me stop there. We've always heard the jokes about mother-in-laws, father-in-laws. You don't hear that kind of stuff. Son-in-laws, daughter-in-laws and stuff. You know what? His father-in-law had a great deal of good advice for him. He listened to his father-in-law. sometimes good advice comes from places we don't expect. There may be somebody that gives you advice all the time, and it may be lousy advice all the time. Maybe they're critical or whatever. But listen to what they say. Because someday they may be something worthwhile. Don't just dismiss it all. Listen to what they say. If it makes sense or if there's something in it, keep it in the back of your mind. Learn from it. Don't just blow them off as I'm not going to listen to you, And so sometimes people, we always trust mom and dad, but father-in-law, mother-in-law, spouse, in-law, spouse of my sister, listen to people. Listen to people that are under you. Try to take what they say and say, is it good sense? In this case, he listened to his father-in-law, says, makes sense. And he did all that his father-in-law had suggested. Verse 25, and Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. The difficult disputes they would bring to Moses, but every minor dispute they would judge themselves. They implemented the plan. He did this. In Israel, it worked. It also works in the church. Now, some people keep track of my sermons, okay? And they'll write them in the Bible and when I preach them. In fact, one person told me that they said, you used this TV preacher's sermon one time. You preached his sermon. And I looked at that was my sermon. I preached that. Well, this person had heard a radio guy preach on this passage and written his name down in the Bible, but my notes were already in the Bible. And years later, when I re-preached the sermon, I don't re-preach many in the early years, when I re-preached the sermon, they accredited my sermon to that guy and thought I was plagiarizing his sermon, when really he was plagiarizing mine. Who's getting credit for my sermon? But at any rate, as it goes, this sermon, if I preached this, some of the basics of this in 1998. So if you were here in 1998, maybe you heard some pieces of the sermon before, okay? But I found it interesting because in my 1998 notes, I talked about the fact that cell groups were the implementation of what we were doing. And this was the very beginning of the cell groups that we were doing in our church. Today, they're called what? Life groups. And we've modified, we've evolved, we've improved, and we've come to the point of life groups in our church. But it all started as cell groups. And back in 1998, I was talking about it as I looked at this very particular passage, because that's what makes ministry work. If at that point we were smaller than this, and when you expect one person to do all the ministry, it doesn't work. So we had to have multiple elders. And we moved that way. Instead of one elder, which is what it was when I came, one guy, we brought on other elders to help. And then some of those eventually we paid and they became pastors. And so we have 4 elders now. And we've got, and some of those are paid pastors. And we spread the leadership team out, and I think we're stronger because of it. We've developed life groups. And we really want every single person to be part of a life group. Because you can come here and hear hopefully good sermons, great music, and have good fellowship and almost every Sunday except this week, good food, in between. But, all of that is terrific. But the life groups are where you can get in a smaller group and share your needs and be ministered to. And it goes to the point there now, when a person gets in the hospital, hopefully the pastor is not the first person to visit, and maybe he won't visit at all, because the person's life group leader will be there. And some of the people from that group might stop by. And when the person comes out from the hospital, then the life group might be providing meals for it. And Julie's ministry is ministry of benevolence. And it used to be they did it all. But now hopefully that life group leader is going to take care of their own people. And if they need some help outside, they might call Julia, they might advertise and get some other people to help them minister to those people. If there's a prayer need, it's a smaller group. And so you have the large group in corporate worship where we can do a lot of neat stuff. But then you've got the small groups, which are life groups in our church. And so we're following this very principle in how we're working out in our church itself. The last thing we have here in this section is verse 27. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went on his way to his own land. And I will tell you that the people that have built into your lives will not always be there. Occasionally they fall, and they go their own way. But that doesn't negate the fact that they built into your lives while God had them there. Sometimes they pass away, We have mentors, they die, they get older, and they go. And we're sorry to see them go. But yet they've built it into our lives, so now we can do it on our own because we've gone through a lot of these leadership principles and we understand them. Sometimes they move. They move out of the area. Sometimes you move out of the area. You move to a different location. All of a sudden that same pastor's not there, or the same mentor you had, or the person on the job, they get promoted to something else and now you're not dealing with them anymore. So as 27, there came the day when Moses had to say goodbye to Jethro. He had to leave him. But Jethro's impact and advice impacted Moses for many, many years to come. In fact, his entire life. And probably, Israel's entire lifetime as a nation. Because the principles of multiple leadership continued on past him and into Joshua's time and on out through life, through time. Moses found out that everyone has to have a part. And that's our principle for this particular section. If you're taking notes there, everyone has a part. Everyone has a part. Because as we look at the scriptures, we find that they teach certain things. I want to share two scriptures into this part that says applying the advice. One scripture is Ephesians 4:11 and 12. And he gave to some apostles, some are prophets, some evangelists, some as pastors and teachers for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry or service. The pastors, the teachers, the evangelists, the leaders in the church weren't put there to do all the work. They were there to train the workers, the ministers who are actually doing God's service. The second verse I want to share with you is 2 Timothy 2:2. It's the last words that we have practically that Paul is writing, and he's writing them to his Timothy, his young son in the faith, Timothy, and he writes these words: "The things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." I teach you. You teach her. She teaches him. He teaches the Sunday school teachers the 12 years old. The 12-year-olds interact with the 6-year-olds, and they teach them. It's a combination. And so consequently, we keep on doing that. So we need to line out that everyone has a part. Because when we talk about ministry, who are the ministers? Okay, if you haven't been here for a while, or you're new, now you know the answer. Who are the ministers? Okay, let's all say it together. Who are the ministers? We are. Yes. We don't say we are. Because we let us have somebody else have the thing. It's not we are, it's I am. Each one of us is the minister. We're simply the leaders, trying to instruct and help people be better. There's a story told in Canada of a contest, a horse pulling contest. One horse pulled 9,000 pounds and was the winner, dead weight. The second runner-up, second place, pulled 7,000 pounds. Now, for my mathematicians in the congregation, together they had pulled how many pounds? 9,000 plus 6,000 is 15,000, okay? They decided to try something. They teamed up the two horses together to pull. Do you think they were able to pull that total amount of weight? They were. In fact, they were able to pull almost twice the amount of weight. They were able to put 30,000 pounds together. Because together, we can pull the load better than we can each individually. That's why it's so important to come to church. It's so important to be on a part of the leadership team. It's so important to take that purple survey and say, I'm going to be a part of something, because with an extra person there and more people, we can pull more weight together. And that's why Satan would like to see you, when you get discouraged or have problems, start coming to church. Because he can pick you off individually so easily. But together, that's awfully hard. Together, let's pull our weight in the ministry for God and see what he can do with us all pulling the same direction. Dear Lord, we thank you for our ministry. We thank you for First Baptist. We thank you for the town we live in. We thank you for the Lower Bucks County. We thank you for all the people we impact, whether it's at the many things, whether it's the youth center, the Labor Day picnic, the film night out, the ministry in Sunday school. I mean, there's so many things we could stay on up here for so many times, saying there's so much that you've allowed us to accomplish and to minister in. As we each participate together, may you multiply our efforts so that we don't get burned out. We don't look at just to one person, but we each understand that we each have a part and a place in this entire ministry of winning the world to Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name we ask this all. Amen.